Elvis Presley once owned a watch that celebrated one of the greatest achievements in music history. 75 million records sold worldwide. At the time, it was more than a luxury watch. But Elvis did something nobody expected. He casually traded it away to a fan. What seemed like an ordinary moment quickly faded into history, until decades later, when that same watch resurfaced and was valued at nearly $1.8 million. So how did a man who treated luxury like it was disposable accidentally create some of the most valuable watch stories in history? This is episode 4 of Hidden Watches of Legends, and Elvis's story is unlike anything we've covered so far. Now, to understand Elvis Presley's watch collection, you first have to understand Elvis Presley himself. Unlike most global icons who flaunted their possessions, Elvis had a completely different relationship with ownership. He didn't treat objects as assets, he treated them as temporary companions. Throughout his life, stories kept emerging from people around him, band members, staff, security guards, and even strangers, describing the same pattern. If Elvis liked someone from the crowd or a fan, then he'd definitely give them his accessories or expensive clothing. And this wasn't performance generosity, nor was there any publicity strategy behind it. Interestingly, most celebrities collect valuable possessions. Elvis did the opposite. He was famous for giving away his favorite jewelry to friends, staff members, and even complete strangers who happened to admire it. But among everything Elvis ever owned, one gift stood above the rest, not because of what it was worth, but because of what it represented. In 1961, RCA Victor presented Elvis with a custom Omega created to celebrate a staggering milestone: 75 million records sold worldwide. In today's world of streaming, that number can feel abstract, but in the early 1960s, it represented something far more physical and far more difficult to achieve. Every single one of those sales was a vinyl record purchased, pressed, shipped, and owned by a real person. There were no algorithms, no digital platforms, and no global instant distribution systems. It was pure physical cultural dominance. To mark that achievement, Omega created a watch that was less a timepiece and more a monument. The case was crafted in solid white gold, measuring approximately 33mm in diameter, and designed in the elegant proportions of a formal dress watch from the era. Surrounding the bezel were 44 brilliant cut diamonds, carefully set to create a continuous ring of light around the case. The dial was restrained and classic, featuring applied indices and a small second sub-dial at 6 o'clock, maintaining Omega's signature mid-century dress aesthetic. Inside, it housed a Swiss hand-wound Omega movement, chosen for precision and refinement rather than complexity. On the case back, an engraving tied the watch permanently to Elvis's achievement, marking it as a commemorative piece created specifically for him. To most people, a watch like this would immediately become untouchable. It would be stored, protected, and preserved as a family artifact, something too meaningful to ever leave a safe. And that's where everything changes. The watch was separated from the Presley estate years ago, and some reports say that Elvis traded the Omega with a fan who admired it and had a diamond set Hamilton. So Elvis exchanged an Omega for a Hamilton, a watch with no diamonds, no gold celebration. Now, if you're enjoying this breakdown so far, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss what comes next. Because every episode uncovers how ordinary objects become extraordinary over time, and Elvis's final watch story is one of the most impressive of all. That's why the next watch caught his attention instantly, and that was about to change the story completely. The watch Elvis became fascinated with was the Hamilton Ventura, and on his wrist it looked elegant and stunning. But the Ventura was never designed to compete in the traditional sense of luxury. It was designed to break it. Elvis fell in love with the watch back in the 1960s after starring in the film Blue Hawaii, where he wore the watch as product placement in the film. Introduced in 1957, the Hamilton Ventura was created by industrial designer Richard R. Bibb, and it immediately stood out as something entirely new in the watch world. Instead of a traditional round case, it featured a bold asymmetrical triangular shield design that looked closer to modern art than conventional horology. At a time when most watches followed strict design traditions, the Ventura looked intentionally futuristic, almost like a concept from another decade. Technically, the Ventura, reference 500, used one of Hamilton's pioneering electric movements, making it one of the first commercially produced electric wristwatches in the world. This early Hamilton electric caliber used a balance wheel regulated by electromagnetic impulses, a breakthrough technology in the late 1950s that marked the transition between mechanical and modern quartz era thinking. The case itself measured roughly 32 to 34 millimeters, depending on variant, crafted in stainless steel, often with a polished or blacked out aesthetic, depending on production batch. The design was sealed and compact, reinforcing its futuristic identity rather than traditional watch elegance. And Elvis loved it, not because it was expensive, not because it was rare, because it felt different. So when he saw a fan wearing a Ventura, the reaction was immediate. He didn't see a downgrade from his Omega, he saw something he wanted more. And in a moment that feels almost unreal today, Elvis made a decision that would define his entire story. He traded the Omega away. The fan walked away with a white gold diamond set Omega, created to celebrate 75 million records sold. And Elvis walked away with a white golden Hamilton Ventura, a futuristic electric watch worth a fraction of the price, but infinitely more aligned with his personality in that moment. And for decades, nobody realized the significance of that exchange, until the Omega reappeared in the collector world. And suddenly, what looked like a casual trade became a $1 million historical artifact. But even that wasn't the most important watch in Elvis's story. If the Ventura was the watch Elvis chose for himself, the next one was chosen for a king, and unlike the Omega, it never left his possession. Among all the watches associated with Elvis Presley, the Rolex King Midas stands out not because of a trade or disappearance, but because of permanence. Elvis received his King Midas, reference 9630 in 1970, from a concert promoter as a thank you for performing 6 sold-out concerts at the Houston Astrodome. It remained with him, and today it still sits at Graceland as part of his preserved legacy. The King Midas was created by Rolex in the late 1960s and designed by Gérald Genta, the same visionary who would later reshape luxury watch design with icons like the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak. But even in his early work, Genta was already experimenting with bold geometry and unconventional luxury language. King Midas was crafted entirely from solid 18-karat gold, weighing significantly more than most Rolex dress watches of its era. Its design was heavily inspired by ancient Greek architecture and the myth of King Midas, featuring an asymmetrical angular case that flowed directly into a sculpted integrated bracelet, making the entire watch feel like a single continuous gold object rather than separate components. Inside, the ultra-thin Rolex Caliber 650 was actually a Piaget base movement, chosen specifically so the watch could maintain its dramatic case proportions without unnecessary thickness. The movement was simple, reliable, and intentionally minimal because the design was the focus of the watch. But what made it truly rare was its production. Only around 1,000 pieces were ever made worldwide, and one of them was owned by Elvis Presley. Unlike the Omega, this watch was not traded away or lost. It remained with him, and more than 50 years later, it hasn't changed. It hasn't disappeared into private hands. It simply remains connected to Elvis. And when you put these 3 watches side by side, a fascinating pattern begins to emerge, because their value has surprisingly little to do with watchmaking itself. At first glance, these watches seem like separate stories, but they're not. Most collectors preserve value through control, keeping, protecting, and storing rare objects. Elvis created value through the opposite behavior entirely. He increased the significance of objects by letting them go, wearing them without caution, or simply treating them as part of everyday life. The Omega became legendary because it was given away. The Ventura became iconic because it was chosen. And King Midas became historically important because it stayed with him. 3 watches, 3 completely different destinies, but one shared outcome. They became valuable not because of what they were made of, but because of who interacted with them. Because this is the part nobody talks about. Collectors are not really paying for diamonds, gold, or mechanics. They're paying for proximity to moments they'll never experience. The Omega's 44 diamonds matter, but not as much as the instant it left Elvis's wrist. King Midas is rare, but not as rare as its connection to the king himself. And that's why these watches continue to grow in value long after the man who wore them is gone. Not because the watches changed, but because the story never stopped growing. And that's the story of Elvis Presley's watches. After a detailed breakdown, we felt that the real story was never about watches. It was about a man who never treated luxury as something to hold on to. And that's exactly why the world still remembers everything he once wore. And if this story inspired you to look differently at Elvis's closet, stay tuned, because in the next episode of Hidden Watches of the Legends, we move into the next story where a single timepiece carries a legacy far beyond its material value. See you there.